everybody. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for coming in relatively early. What an honor. I'm going to be talk about spend a moment on philosophy. Brinkley warned you that people of the book, Jewish, Christian, Islam. There's a common one thing that, well, there's lots of things. One thing I'd like to draw attention to. In the Torah, there's an odd line where they're describing the Hebrews settling in the wilderness or among the Philistines, that they say if you move a boundary marker, moving a man's property marker is a sin worse than murder. That seems odd. Why would that be a sin worse than murder? Well, it is in one respect. If your paradigm is here we are out in the wilderness trying to settle, trying to create a civilization, the attitude that you can cheat your neighbor and move a property marker is corrosive to our whole project. It's corrosive to this whole civilizational project, and that's why it's something even grander than murder. The Romans understood this thing. They had a conception. They figured out Roman law was very much tied to the idea of reason, and it should be something that someone could apperceive just through their reason. And they figured out that there are some kinds of goods that when you warehouse them have this property. If you give me your coat and I give you a claim check for it, when you come back with your claim check, you don't just expect a coat out of my coat rack, you expect your coat. But there are some properties that are not, or some things that are not like that. The Romans realized, like a cask of oil. And you warehouse a cask of oil with someone and you get a claim check. And when you go back with your claim check, you really don't care about getting your cask. You just want a cask of oil. And they discovered that there were people who realized, gee, I can have 100 people come and give me a cask each. I can give them each a receipt. And if I can really probably sell 70 or 80 of them out the back and just keep 20, or loan them out the back and just keep 20, and most days that's going to work. Anyone who comes in for their cask, it's all going to work. But the Romans understood that as a crime of expropriation. And even when it came to banks, temples really were the early banks. And I'll just point out that in the New Testament, there's one scene where Jesus is violent. And it's always translated as he goes to the temple and he drives the money changers from the temple. There's a Spanish economist, Jesus Huerta de Soto, who says that's a mistranslation. He's argued this. If you go back and deconstruct the Greek, and he's done this, what he was actually fighting, what he was driving from the temple, were those who were engaged in fractional reserve banking. They were engaged in just that thing I described, where they were taking a certain amount, loaning or selling some, and keeping fractional reserves. That's the one thing that could drive Jesus to violence. And in Islam, of course, in Sharia finance, everybody knows Sharia finance prevents interest. Well, actually, Sharia finance prevents two things: interest and something that called gharar, G-H-R-A-R-A-R, which I can't pronounce correctly, evidently, but gharar. And anytime you try to read what this is, the first thing they tell you is it's really, really difficult to translate. But as far as, and then they translate it, or they describe it, and what the Arab scholars describe is a concept very, very much like expropriation. So there's this similar, so to me, the meaning of the blockchain has this biblical significance, because the first step, if we're going to build something together as a civilization, as whatever, the first step is understanding boundaries. Because when you understand boundaries, then you can understand how to cooperate. You can't really cooperate until you can't really give consent until you know what the boundaries are about. So sort of the most atomic level of the, conceptually, of the idea of having mankind or a civilization working together to build something is getting clearer about boundaries and what is and what's expropriation and what's cooperation. So let me show you how that applies in our capital market and what concerns me. Oh, this is I, Bitcoin Messiah and Scourge of Wall Street, which is according to Wired magazine. Yeah. I'll tell you how it's funny here. I just showed that on Tuesday, I think, in New York, and I don't get a round of applause. I'll mention in January 2007, I was called into a man's office on Wall Street, a big hedge fund manager, and himself a good guy. But he called me in to tell me, Patrick, the first words he said to me were, Patrick, I want you to know you're the single most hated man I've ever known in my entire life. You used to be kind of a golden boy on Wall Street, but now you could kill people, and we wouldn't hate you in this town like we hate you. Well, let me tell you how that came about, and Wall Street, blockchain's application to Wall Street are all quite related. In a normal transaction, let's say there's an investor buying something from a hedge fund, some stock from a hedge fund. They're both represented by broker-dealers. And when they make the transaction, the cash and the stock change hands, right? That's called settlement. It's really not that simple. When I was a kid, how it worked was down on Wall Street, there were guys on bicycles and had burlap sacks over their shoulders. And they rode around among the broker-dealers with sacks of stock certificates. And they had all kinds of complicated schemes. If my client had sold your client 70 shares of something, but I only have a 100-share certificate, there's this way we can market and both initial stuff. And this was the settlement system on Wall Street. In the 1960s, volume on Wall Street quadrupled. And the guys on the bicycles log-jammed. And it became known as the Great Wall Street Paperwork Crisis. Only old-timers remember it. But from 68 to 71, Wall Street was only open Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and only a few hours a day to give the guys on the bicycles the time to catch up and unscramble. And there were broker-dealers that collapsed, incidentally, because it's like a database. It's a lot like a database jamming. And the jam ripples out, and once it ripples out, it takes lots of things with it. So the SEC got the industry together, and they proposed two solutions. Solution number one was an electronic peer-to-peer settlement system. And solution number two was, let's have one central vault. It was called immobilization. We'll put all of the stock in the world in one central vault, or in the country in one central vault, and it will, not just a guard, but that company will own that stock, and it will give us, contractually, it will give us it will generate claims against that stock, and we'll just trade these claims. The industry organized a group called the NASD, National Association of Security Dealers, just to fight for option number one. That's what the industry wanted. The SEC crammed down the throats, really, of the industry. Number two, they said that they were not technologically ready for option number one. And they said, and the industry fought back, and the SEC said, we'll do it just as a temporary solution. Well, we'll adopt this. And that second solution says they took a back office company of the New York Stock Exchange, actually, and they called it the DTCC, and they made it a central counterparty clearing for our capital markets. All the stock in America is owned. I don't mean just guardianed, just warehoused. I mean owned. If you think you own any stock in any publicly traded company in America, you're incorrect. No one owns any stock. All the stock in America is owned by a company no one's heard of called Cede Company, and CEDE. And from that stock, there are share entitlements generated, and they go into this system of the DTCC, and money is in the DTC, and it moves around among accounts there. There's a group of several dozen brokers who are tied direct. They're called clearing brokers. They're plumbed directly into the DTCC. And when you're trading in the stock market, what's really going, and then there's other couple thousand brokers plumbed into them. And when you're trading in the stock market, You think you're buying and selling your stock, but you're not. All the stock is staying immobilized and legally owned by one company. And these daisy chains of contractual rights, from them to DTCC to clearing brokers to referring brokers to your account, these contractual claims are all that are trading. And if you get into those thick legal contracts, they send you when you open an E-Trade account and you read the part upside down, backwards in Greek letters, that's really what it's telling you. You do not own any stock. And there's all kinds of provisions in the system for what happens. Well, I look at this and I say, what could possibly go wrong? Well, and in 1978, the SEC made this temporary solution permanent. Milton Friedman said, nothing's so permanent as a temporary government solution. In 1978, they made that. The solution in 1985, there was actually an SEC, I think they hired a judge or something named Pollack, and he wrote the Pollack report that's been lost to history. But he said, he talked about how terrible a system this was. And it is a terrible system. And what happened in 2008, incidentally, is that it log jammed. And people forget this. It's been lost to history. But the proximate cause of this government stepping in on September 5th, 2008, September 15th, that Wednesday, wasn't Lehman going down. It was that whole system I just described log jammed. Here's a different solution. Imagine a ledger, a magical ledger, cryptographically protected, public, transparent, and when people trade things, if Grandpa's buying a baseball glove from that guy, you're just writing out one coin in the ledger and you're writing it in the other guy's account. And you could do it with stock. So if the old grandpa is buying some stock from that guy, you're writing out coins and you're writing in coins that represent stock, and that's how the transfer gets made. This whole meshigas is the only word I can think of for it. Can be replaced. And it is the case. I got to look this up. Somebody big on Wall Street, not Jamie Dimon, but somebody like that, or somebody just said in November that, and I was shocked that he said this, he said that every stock and bond being sold on Wall Street could be tokenized. And in 5 years, every stock and bond will be tokenized. Which is to say that whole plumbing is going to wither away and be replaced. We have been working on that, on just that. Overstock has a company called Medici, who's president and organizer. Jonathan Johnson spoke yesterday. One of its 12 investments is T0. One of the sexiest, but not the sexiest. There's 3 or 4 very sexy. T0, in 2015, we bought a company that's a node at the center of Wall Street, a very unique company called SpeedRoute, run by a wonderful fellow, Joe Camarata. 2.5% of the order flow of American equity markets flows through this company. And we blockchainized it. We bought it. We went to the SEC and said, we're going to turn this into a blockchain ATS. They gave us deemed approval on April 1st, 2015. That means that we're going to use turn our ATS into something that could do this on the blockchain. We issued that summer the world's first private blockchain security. It was a $5 million bond to a far-sighted guy named Don Emschweller at First New York. $5 million bond, and 6 months later, we bought it back from them. It was just to prove the plumbing and that this worked, and it was only evidenced and recorded in the blockchain. Then we applied to the SEC to do the world's first public blockchain security. We applied in December of 2015, and they gave us permission, deemed effective. We worked with the SEC for a year, showed them our systems. You can look up the S3. It all describes what we're going to do. And we went deemed effective December of, 15 months ago. And we got out the world's first public blockchain security. We built a blockchain solution to a problem on Wall Street. It has to do with securities lending. I won't go into the details, but the record keeping behind securities lending is not nearly as robust and vigorous as it should be. It's actually, we came up with a system I'm not going to walk through the details, but a blockchain software system that solves that problem. That problem is important to me. I think it was behind what happened in 2008. SpeedRoute is building both connectivity to the crypto exchanges and a security token trading platform that we anticipate once the SEC cracks down, or as they seem to be doing on the world of ICOs. We think this capital formation that has gone on in the world of utility tokens has to and frankly should switch to security tokens, and we're the guys there with the system that can take it. Thank you, and thank you for coming in early. And I'll be outside of the T0 booth if anyone wants to talk.